Today, you're going to learn exactly how to build a sick drop-down list component using Next.js, Tailwind CSS, and of course, React.js. So what we're going to build here is basically a list of drop-down items in which each item is going to have a title, but then when you click on the items, you're going to see the content of the item itself. And we're going to have this nice little transition effect here to where it eases in and out nicely. Nice little hover effect when you hover over the items, and just a nice clean looking drop-down list. So without further ado, let's go create this within VS Code using Tailwind, Next.js, and React.js. Here in VS Code, I'm going to open up my terminal, and then I'm going to run npx create-next-app at latest. And then I'm going to name this drop-down-list. Not going to use TypeScript, no ESLint, yes Tailwind CSS, no src directory, yes app router, no customize the default import alias. So it's going to create this template Next.js project, and then I'm going to go File, Open, and then open this within VS Code. So we have our template project, and I'm going to open the app directory here. And then the first thing we're going to do is change page.js to JSX, because that gives me a little bit better code completion the way I have this set up. And if you've watched any of my videos before, you know that I just like the React icon more than the JavaScript one. So within the app directory, the first thing that we're going to do is actually start with the drop-down list component. Now, we're going to create, there's three different things we're going to do. Within page.jsx, we are going to adjust the styles here, and then we're also going to render our drop-down list. And then within the app directory, we're also going to create two different components. One is going to be a drop-down list, and then the other is going to be a drop-down list item that is going to be rendered within our drop-down list. So I want to first, before we touch this homepage at all, first want to start with a new folder in our app directory. I'm going to go _components, because that's going to make this a private folder. So even if I added a page.js file within this _components, it still wouldn't be a public route because it is explicitly a private folder. And I've kind of been liking that pattern lately. But we're going to create a new file within the _components folder, and it's going to be called dropdown list.jsx. And then what we're going to do is create a const dropdown list. It's going to be equal to an anonymous function in which we're going to accept one prop here, and we're going to destructure it, and it's going to be list data. So we're going to pass a prop called list data to dropdown list, and this list data is going to be an array of data that we are going to render within our dropdown list. So then we'll do the arrow, curly braces, and then return. We could probably do an implicit return here as well. But we're going to have a wrapper div, and then we're just going to map over our list data. So list data dot map, and then we're going to accept an item. We're going to return a drop down item component, and we'll create this here in just a sec. But this drop down item, it's going to have a key, which is going to be the item dot title. And then for the drop down item, the title is going to be the item dot title. And then the content is going to be the item dot content. Now, probably better way to derive the key would be to have some sort of ID on all of your drop down elements. So if you were getting data from the database, all these elements might have an ID to them. So that would be a better ID to use here. But for the sake of this example, we'll just keep it at the title. The only potential problem with this is that you might run into a scenario to where you have two of the same titles, which would give you duplicate keys, which isn't a good idea in React. So generally, I would try to use an ID here coming from the data itself. But for this, it'll work just fine. So basically, we're going to render a drop-down item for every item within our list data array that we're going to pass to the drop-down list component. So the drop-down, it's going to have a title of the drop-down, as well as the content when you open the dropdown, and then we're passing those here. So this list data, it's going to be an array of items that have a title property as well as a content property. But now we need to create the dropdown item. But before we do that, let's add some Tailwind classes. So class name is equal to, and we're just going to add one space -y-4 to add some better spacing here. And then we're going to export default dropdown list. So that should be good to go. And then within our components folder, let's now create our dropdown item.jsx. This is going to be a client component because we're going to use state to open and close our dropdown items. And we're also going to import use state as well as use ref from React. And you'll see how we use these in a second. I'll say const dropdown item is equal to, it's going to accept a title and a content prop that we're going to destructure here right away. And then we are going to open up our curly braces. I'm going to say const is open, comma, set is open is equal to use state. And it's going to be initialized as false for the default value. And then we're going to say const content ref is equal to use ref and initialize it to null. And we're going to use this ref for styling purposes actually, but we'll see that in a sec. So I'm going to return a wrapper div that we'll add styles to in a second. This div is going to have a button in which the content of the button is going to be our title. So they're going to click on this button to open the dropdown. So it's going to be the title. Now this button, it's going to have an on click that is going to be an anonymous inline function that when clicked, it's going to set is open to not is open. So if the dropdown is open, set the dropdown to closed. If the dropdown is closed, well, set it to open. And then we're going to add some styles to this in a second, but we'll leave that for now. Below the button, this is where we're going to render our content. So let's do another div, and then we're going to add a ref, which is going to be our content ref. And then we're going to add some class names as well as a style property, but I'll wait on those in a second. And then within this outer div, we're going to render an inner div that just displays our content. So really, when it comes to markup, that's all this is going to be, is a button as well as some content. So fairly straightforward. Now, the more tricky part, and let's make sure to export this or else I'm going to forget, export default drop down item. And then let's also within dropdown list, make sure to import the dropdown item. But now let's add our styles here. So for this div, we're going to add a class name. We're going to add a border. The border is going to be gray -700. It's going to be rounded medium. And then overflow is going to be hidden. And then on our button here, I'm going to add a class name as well. It's going to be width full, so W-full. Text is going to be left aligned, PX4. And we're going to do PY2. And PX is padding left and right. So on the X-axis, and then PY is padding top and bottom on the Y-axis in Tailwind CSS. And then we're going to do a background gray 800, rounded T medium, focus, outline, none, hover, background gray 700 to add a slight hover effect. And the rounded T medium is going to add like a slight rounding to the border of this button here. And then I think all the other styles are pretty self-explanatory. But if you have any questions, let me know down below. And then for our div, as a sibling to this button, we're going to add a class name in which we're actually going to use JavaScript here. So open up curly braces and backticks. We are going to transition the height property with a duration of 500. We're going to set the ease to in-out. And then we're going to do $ curly brace and say is open. If that's true, we're going to make the height auto, but else we're going to make the height 0, which is basically going to say if it's open, just give it whatever the auto height calculates. But if not, it should have a height of 0 to not show our content. And then we're also going to add a style here, which we're going to have curly braces for our style. And then we're going to pass in an object, so double curly braces. And the height is going to be is open ? Then we're going to do backticks, $ curly brace, content ref dot current dot scroll height height pixels else 0. And this is going to help with our transition here. Really, the long story short is the only way I could get this to work was adding this style as well. Maybe there's another way to do it with just class names, but for me, just Googling and reading around on how to get the effect I wanted of having like a smooth in and out transition here, I needed to adjust the scroll height here on this div. And I needed to do that with the style property, or at least that's what I found to work. But maybe you could find a way to just use Tailwind and within class names. And then lastly, on the inner div here, we are going to add a class name. Padding left and right is going to be 4. Padding top and bottom, so PY, is going to be 2. Background gray of 900. And then rounded bottom medium. Then render our content there. So I believe, let me check my class names for any typos here, because that's not uncommon for me, but I think I'm all good to go here. So we have our drop-down item, we have our drop-down list, and now let's go to our page and render these. So what we're going to do is remove everything in the return statement. We're going to remove this image, and then we're going to create our list. So I'm going to say const list data is equal to an array. And we're just doing this within the body of the home component. This could be elsewhere. This could be from our database, but we're just doing it for an example here. But it's going to be an array of objects in which it's going to have a title property. And we're just going to say item 1, but you could of course change this. And then it's going to have a content property as well. And I'm going to say content for item 1. And then I'm going to do Option Shift down arrow that many times. And then we're just going to change this. I'm going to do 2 and 2 and then 3 and 3 and just change all of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth. You don't need to watch me do that, but I'll see you in just a second. So I have all these good to go, but I'm going to also switch item 1 to lowercase 1 just because my OCD tells me it should match all of the other ones. So that looks good. We're going to add a wrapper div, and then we're going to add a header within that div that's going to have an H1 that is going to just say Next.js drop down list component. And then below the header, we're going to do a main tag that is just going to render our drop down list, importing that from underscore components drop down list, in which our list data is going to be our list data. And make sure to add a closing tag there. And then for our outer div, we'll add a class name where we'll say the min height is going to be the screen height. So it's going to be full screen height. Background is going to be a gradient to right from black. So it's going to be dark themed here via gray 900 to gray 800 text white. So this is going to give us a nice kind of cool background gradient here. And then the header is going to have a class name of text center, and then padding top and bottom on the y-axis is going to be 10. For our H1, we're going to add a class name of text for XL to change the font size a little bit. And then font is going to also be bold. And then on our main tag, we will add a class name that is going to have a max width of 2XL and a margin left and right of auto to kind of center this in our page. And then a padding of top and bottom of 10. And I think that basically gives us everything we need. We have our drop-down item, our drop-down list, and our home page. So now let's open the terminal, run npm run dev, and then let's go check out localhost 3000 and see if I messed anything up. So we have our Next.js drop-down list component. We have our nice little background gradient here. And then when I hover the items, I see a nice hover effect. We see all of our titles. And then we see a nice kind of ease in and out for these drop-down components. So it's looking good here. I mean, you could, to add more to this, you could add like a little drop-down icon here to make it more clear maybe that it's a drop-down list. But, you know, if you hover over this, you see the pointer for the mouse icon, and then you have the hover effect as well, which kind of gives you an indication that these are drop-down items. So yeah, I think this looks pretty dang good here. And that is how you can create a nice, clean looking drop-down list in Next.js, Tailwind CSS, and React, of course. So thanks for tuning into this. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in that next one.